In the fjords of Norway, where mountains rise straight from the sea and fresh water meets salt in ancient patterns, there are places that exist between worlds. Places neither fully alive nor completely dead. Places where bargains made in desperation echo through centuries. Places that hunger for what they have lost. This is a story about fishermen who saw lights where no lights should be. About a god who discovered a village that drowned but never died. And about a son he had forgotten for 500 years. The fishing village of Saltvik clung to the Norwegian coast like a barnacle to stone. 60 families made their living from the sea, as their ancestors had for 1,000 years. The waters were rich but unpredictable. Some seasons brought abundance, others brought hunger. The fishermen knew to respect the ocean's moods, to read the weather, to never take more than they needed. But lately, something had changed. It started with the lights. Old Magnus was the first to see them. He had been checking his nets before dawn when he noticed a glow beneath the surface of Nordfjord, the deep inlet north of the village. At first, he thought it was bioluminescence, plankton stirred by currents. But the lights were too steady, too organized. They looked almost like windows, like lamplight shining through water. He told his son about it over breakfast, but dismissed it as tricks of the eyes. He was 67. His vision wasn't what it used to be. But then others started seeing the lights too. Young Christian saw them while sailing home after dark, describing them as a grid pattern, perfectly geometric, like a settlement viewed from above. Ingrid, mending nets on the dock, saw them during the day, swore she could make out shapes, structures, buildings beneath the waves. The fishermen began to talk. Some said it was a submarine, Russian or American, spying on Norwegian waters. Others said it was underwater equipment, research stations, or oil exploration. But the oldest fishermen, the ones who remembered their grandparents' stories, said nothing. They just stopped fishing in Nordfjord entirely. The disappearances began 3 weeks after the first sighting. Christian went out alone one evening to check a buoy that had drifted. He never returned. They found his boat the next morning, drifting empty. His equipment was still aboard. His jacket still hung on its hook. But Christian was gone. The Coast Guard searched for 3 days and found nothing. The villagers mourned, assuming an accident. The sea took people sometimes. It was the price of living on the coast. But then Eric disappeared, and Sonia, and 2 more. All were experienced fishermen. All were last seen near Nordfjord. All vanished without a trace. The village began to panic. Some families left, seeking safety inland. Others armed themselves, convinced something in the water was hunting them. The remaining fishermen organized patrols and demanded answers from the authorities. But the authorities found nothing. No evidence of foul play. No bodies, no wreckage. Just the lights, growing brighter each night. That's when Gerd arrived. The god of the sea walked into Saltvik on a gray morning, wearing the shape of a sailor. He had weathered skin, calloused hands, and eyes the color of deep water. He carried no belongings and needed no introduction. The fishermen recognized him on instinct, the way prey recognizes a predator, the way children recognize a parent they've never met. He asked to borrow a boat. Old Magnus, the first to see the lights, offered his. Gerd accepted with a nod and sailed alone toward Nordfjord. The villagers watched from shore, uncertain whether they should feel relieved or terrified. The water above Nordfjord was calm, almost unnaturally so. Gerd anchored Magnus's boat and stood at the bow, looking down into the depths. The lights were clearly visible now, even in daylight. They formed the pattern of streets, of buildings, of a complete settlement. He recognized it immediately. Vikholm, a village that had stood on these shores 500 years ago. A thriving community of 200 souls, living in harmony with the sea, until the drought came. Gerd remembered it vaguely. A dry summer, unusually hot for Norway. The rivers and wells ran low. Crops failed. The people grew desperate. They had come to the shore and called to him, begged for water, for rain, for mercy. Gerd had been occupied elsewhere. A storm in the North Sea required his attention. He had barely noticed the prayers from this small village. By the time he returned, Vikholm had made their own solution. They had struck a bargain with the water spirits, the Vidar who dwelled in the deep places, ancient and alien, and utterly without human morality. The spirits had offered them eternal water, all they could ever need, in exchange for their lives. The villagers had accepted. They walked into the fjord on the autumn equinox, every man, woman, and child, holding hands and singing hymns. And they drowned themselves. But the water spirits had honored the bargain in their own way. The villagers did not die. Not truly. They remained conscious beneath the waves, preserved in the cold depths, living in their drowned homes for 500 years. Neither alive nor dead, neither saved nor damned. Sustained by the eternal water they had been promised. And now, after 5 centuries, they were lonely. Gerd dove. The water was cold enough to kill a mortal in minutes, but gods do not feel temperature the way humans do. He descended through darkness, following the lights. As he drew closer, the village came into focus. It was perfectly preserved. Wooden houses, their walls covered in algae, but structurally intact. Cobblestone streets, though the stones were green with moss. A church with its steeple still pointing upward, toward a surface it would never breach. And the villagers. They moved through their drowned streets like living people, walking slowly, deliberately, going about the routines of life in a grotesque pantomime of normalcy. They looked almost human, with skin pale and waterlogged, hair drifting like seaweed, and eyes filmed white by centuries of immersion. But they moved. They breathed water. They lived. And when they saw Gerd, they stopped. Every single one of them turned to face him. 200 sets of white eyes, staring. Then they began to move toward him. Gerd swam to the church. The villagers followed, but did not attack, just surrounded him in a growing circle. Inside the church, sitting in the front pew, was their leader, the man who had made the bargain, the man who had led them all into the water. Gerd recognized him, Tormund, his very own son. 500 years ago, Gerd roamed among mortals more often. He took lovers, including a widow named Astrid from Vikholm, who gave him a son, Tormund. Strong and clever, he had his father's eyes and his mother's grit. Gerd would drop by with gifts and tales of his travels. But gods aren't great dads. They get lost in their own world. He meant to be there for Tormund, but time slipped by. One moment he was there, and the next Tormund was gone. Gerd figured he was dead. Mortal lives are so short. He mourned a bit and moved on. Now he understood the terrible truth. Tormund had not died. He had been here, drowned but conscious, for 500 years. Waiting. Tormund's voice came as bubbles, somehow forming words in the water. He spoke of the drought, of watching the village suffer, of praying to his father for help, prayers that went unanswered. He spoke of the decision he had made. As village leader, as Njord's son, he could not let his people die. So he had sought another way. The water spirits had been eager to bargain. They promised salvation. They did not mention the cost until it was too late. Now Tormund and his people were trapped, conscious but unchanging, sustained by water that would never let them go, living in an endless present where nothing grew, nothing changed, nothing died. For 500 years they had endured, alone. But recently, Tormund had realized something. If they could not leave the water, perhaps they could bring others into it. The drowning victims from Saltvik were here, walking the streets of Vikholm, Christian, Eric, Sonia, and the others. Pale and waterlogged, but alive in the same horrible way. New faces after 5 centuries of the same 200. New companions in their eternal prison. Tormund looked at his father with those white, dead eyes, and he asked why Njord had abandoned them. Njord had no answer that could justify 500 years of suffering. He told the truth. He had forgotten, had been distracted, had failed his son and this village completely. Tormund nodded slowly. He had suspected as much. The god asked how to fix things, but Tormund just laughed, bubbles escaping as he did. Nothing could be undone. The bargain was forever. The water spirits kept their word, no doubt about it. But Tormund had a wish. If the villagers had to stay in this sunken life, he didn't want them to be lonely. He wanted more to join them. Let Saltvik come to Vikholm under the waves. All the god had to do was nothing. Just let Tormund and his people keep luring fishermen down until the whole village was below, together forever, like a family reunion that never ends. Njord gazed at his son and the village of the drowned, where new victims were struggling to adjust to their underwater fate. He thought about justice and the heavy burden of divine neglect. He could wipe out the village, freeing the spirits and granting them the peace they deserved centuries ago. But that would mean facing Tormund, risking his son's life again. Leaving would let the cycle continue, damning innocence to endless suffering. Or maybe he could find another way. Njord made his offer. He could not break the bargain, but he could give them something else, the ability to sleep. True sleep, deep and dreamless, a mercy the water spirits had not included. The villagers could choose to sleep for years, decades, centuries, spending most of their existence in peaceful oblivion. In exchange, they must release the people of Saltvik and stop luring others into the water. Tormund was silent for a long time. Finally, he asked what would happen to them in the distant future. Njord admitted he did not know, but he made a promise. He would not forget this time. He would visit. He would ensure that when Ragnar came, the drowned village would be freed. It was the best he could offer. Tormund looked at his people, at the recent captives, at his father, and he accepted. The people of Saltvik woke on the shore the next morning. Christian, Eric, Sonia, and all the others, alive and breathing air, with only vague memories of walking through an underwater village. They thought they had dreamed it. Njord stayed for 3 days, teaching them that Nord Fjord was forbidden, sacred, not to be fished or sailed. The villagers agreed and erected a marker carved in stone. Njord returned to the depths one last time. In the drowned village, everyone was already asleep, 200 figures tucked away in their underwater homes. Tormund was the last one awake, sitting in the church where his father had found him. Finally, he stood up and walked to his own bed, ready for sleep. Njord waited until he was sure everyone was in a deep slumber before heading back to the surface. He'd return in 10 years. He wouldn't forget this time. Saltvik still stands on the Norwegian coast. The fishermen still see lights in Nordfjord sometimes, but they have learned to look away, to respect the boundary, to remember that some places belong to those who came before. Deep beneath the water, in a village that drowned 500 years ago, 200 people sleep. They dream of rain, of rivers flowing, of fresh water that does not trap. Sometimes they wake, walk through their streets, remember their lives. Then they sleep again, waiting for the end of the world, waiting for their father to keep his promise. And Njord visits, every decade without fail, sits in the church and watches over his sleeping son. The gods are not good fathers, but sometimes they try to be better. If you enjoyed this content, like and subscribe for more, and comment below where in the world you're listening from. There are fans of these dark Nordic stories all over the world.